Steve. Aloha, my brother. How you doing?
I'm good.
Cool, my brother. So first and foremost, Steve, a gigantic aloha and mahalo, and thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Glad to do it.
And you're part of a series that we've been doing. It's called Off the Road, which we started when the pandemic arrived. So we always begin with a few similar questions, and I see that Fire It Up actually ties in nicely to it. So first and foremost, where are you now, and is this where you've been since the pandemic started?
I'm at my office at RCA, Nashville, the building that was built for Elvis in 1964 after Salmon sold his contract. And after he'd already made a couple of movies and got real rich. So RCA bought Elvis's contract, and Elvis did so well in the first few years, they built him this building and studio. Where I'm at is the old mastering room of Chet Atkins, and this was his office for a long time, a mastering room. The studio was his idea, built in 1968, and that's in another room. It's right next to it, but it's right here.
You're in Nashville.
Yeah, at the RCA building in Nashville, Tennessee.
Fantastic. And
yeah.
Is this where you've been since the pandemic began?
Oh, yeah. No, I was at home, not in the studio, not in my office.
Right.
I'm in my office now because there's going to be a whole house full of people at in about an hour or so.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided to do them down here. Sometimes I do them at home, and it depends on what I do in the interviews. But
Sure.
I'm in my office right now, and that's Chet Atkins' old office and mastering room. The studio itself, not the big studio, the big room we're not in. That's A. And to bring you up to date, there's an A, B, and a C. We're in C. And that's in the same building. B is now a museum off to the side, and that is the first studio that I did. The first session I did in Nashville was in Studio B. It's now a museum. I don't think I have anything to do with it. But and I drove up from Memphis, did a session, drove back. I don't even remember who we played on. I remember the session, but and how we did it. But that was before the days they knew to put baffles and stuff up. They didn't know they could do that. So to keep from getting what we call crosstalk of that echo sound, they made all of the musicians kind of gather around the drummer. So there was no bleed, what they call bleed.
Right.
And growing up the way I did, I don't think they get it much anymore. But if a mic line is laying over another mic line, you get a ghosty sound. It's kind of weird. They call it crosstalk.
Yeah, I've heard of that before. That's cool.
What that is. You don't hear that on records because if they get it, they're going to do everything they can to get rid of it before the audience gets to hear it. And the thing that has confused me for years, and this happened probably 20 years ago, when vinyl came back, that was maybe about 5 years ago, vinyl came back. The kids want to hear the cracks and pops and the needle skipping and stuff. I didn't know that. I said, man, I spent 60 years of my life trying to get rid of those noises, clicks and pops. And that's what they want to hear. Because if they don't hear it, then they know it's not authentic, or they think it might not be authentic. They don't know. So.
That's cool. Well, you've definitely been around the block for sure. And when
I've done a few of those.
Yes, you have.
I went to go buy some record heads before, playback heads.
And I was thinking of some of the well-known artists that we've lost to COVID-19. I know at least one has a really strong connection to you, and I wanted to maybe start there. John Prine, his 1975 album, Common Sense, you produced. Share some stories and memories of that for us.
Well, I remember one of his interviews, and this can go out on air. It's kind of funny. They were interviewing John because the album was very successful. And so the interviewer said, when are you going to cut another record in Memphis? And he said, never. And he didn't. Bless his heart. We were good friends. I never did go to his house and all that kind of stuff. I've been in his studio a few times, the one he had here, but we would run into each other at the airport and on planes and stuff. And it was always good to see him. And I remember on that album, somebody who's very famous is not with us either, is John Goodman. He was a very, very good friend of John Prine's. And I remember picking him up at the airport. He came off playing acoustic guitar. Of course, I don't know where the case was, probably under the plane or something, playing Green Onions because he knew I was picking him up.
Wow.
That was kind of crazy.
That's a great story. That's a very cool story. And, I was thinking because of your wide range of connections before we get into Fire It Up and some of these other artists that we lost during the crisis, I wonder if you've got connections to any of them. Ellis Marsalis, Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne, Manu Dibango, John Bucky Pizzarelli, Charlie Pride, Lee Konitz, Toots Hibbert, any of them in your lexicon?
Not really. And, the guys that were in the band Dreams was one of the first things I did for Columbia in the early 70s. And I don't stay in touch with any of those guys. I've run into them. Clark Rainey I've run into, and he came to see a Blues Brothers gig. We played down in Texas one time. He showed up. And Billy Cobham, I ran into him. He took off right after that album and went to Sweden and did great over there. He did Fraggle Rock, I think. Produced it or wrote it or whatever he did. And he came back to L.A. and I ran into him on the elevator. I was over I forget why I was even there, but I stayed in the same place we used to stay. And there's Billy in the elevator. He said he came over because his son was in the rap business and had done real good. This was several years ago. And I had met an old, I was a real fan of this guy. Billy, but the guy I also met downstairs was Fats Domino, and I had never run into him or met him before. And a lot of those artists I looked up to, I'd never met. I never met Longman Paulin, and I admired those guys. But I did see him play one time when I was about 20 or 21, and we were playing some club, and they closed it. That band, the 508s, were playing the Clearwater. So we asked the guy, the owner, said, well, since you're closing down the club, we played at a club downstairs from the big ballroom. And he said, well, we're going to close because everybody be wanting to go to the concert. And I said, okay. So Duck and I said, well, can you get us in upstairs? We were underage. You had to be 21 because they had drinking, and we weren't 21 yet. That happened more than once in Memphis. But anyway, we got to go up and watch them play, and that blew me away. And so I go home that night, and I'm rummaging around in my closet. My mom gets up about midnight or so. She said, Steve, what are you doing? I said, trying to find a belt. I wanted to get a long strap like Longman Paulin had, and that's what he played that night, a big long strap. And I played that way for many, many years. So it is what it is.
That's impressive, my brother. I understand this new record came about largely during the pandemic, as well as based on some sessions a few years back with Felix Cavallari. Explain a little bit about how Fire It Up came together, Steve.
All right. The reason it came together was because of John Tippett. And what it was a bunch of songs. We used to write, John and I used to write all the time we just had a Tuesday set out. And so when he was doing the Felix Cavallari, Steve Cropper thing, he got out some of those old tracks, old songs. And so Felix said, he played on a couple of them. And he said, I'm not going to finish those lyrically, and I wouldn't sing them if they were finished. I said, okay. And so we just thought they were lost songs. And John called me and said, he has a studio in his house, so he has access to all those tracks. And he called me and said, well, some of the stuff is really good. And he'd call me from time to time through the years and say, I want to finish this song up and put it on so-and-so's album. I said, go for it, man, that's fine. So there were tracks that I thought were just lost songs that never seen the light of day, or never would ever see the light of day. And John got the idea, and I said, well, John, you're going to need a singer on them. He said, I got one. I said, well, you better send me some stuff that he sung on. And then Roger C. Real is singing, and my goodness, is that guy something else. So there you go. I fell in love with it immediately, and wrote John back. I talked to him on the phone. I said, does this guy put that much energy in everything he does? And there it is. You can listen to it now. The thing about Far Away, we got Beth Hooker singing background on it. And she lives next door to John, so all she had to do is walk through the backyard. So pretty easy. And for my little bit of envelopment, I'd already done the tracks and played the original rhythm guitar. And after I said, I'm not going to put any guitar on, any lead stuff on until I hear all the vocals. And so they finished them all. And so I'm only 5 or 10 minutes from the studio from my house. So it was easy enough to get out. And Nashville, fortunately, was not as locked down as some cities were in this country. So, the world has been locked down. But then that's why these tracks came to life, I guess. So John worked on them. And the funny thing about the vocals with Roger, all of them were done on an iPhone.
Wow.
Now the thing now is that is real good news to the phone people. However, they're all about the movie end of the phone now, about making your own home movies and all.
Right.
And if we had done this back in the days when they were promoting how good the microphone was, and even my own engineer, we were listening to some of the mixes in the car, and coming back from lunch, and he said, "Man, I can't believe that was done with an iPhone," even though he just mixed it that morning. And that's true. The quality is there. It's great. It's like it was done on a $15,000 mic, vintage mic, but it was done on an iPhone.
You know what I love, brother, is when you're talking about the quality, I go all the way back to some of your earliest stuff and the way that it still sounds so tasty today. Like Otis Redding, for example. Share your first memories of getting to do that stuff and learn this craft that you're still putting out so well.
Well, the thing about it, Otis, was when I heard him sing for the first time, the hair on my arm literally stood up. No artist has ever been able to do that. So, I've always waited. That's not the only test. They're either good or they're not good. It has nothing to do with the hair on my arm. But when Otis did, I said, oh, my God, And I stopped him. He said, what's the matter? You don't like it? I said, no, I love it, man. I got to go get Jim Stewart, who owned the company. And he was in the control room, and I ran up there, and I just knew I was going to lose my job if this didn't work out. I said, Jim, stop what you're doing. You got to come and hear this guy sing. And he said, Steve, what do you think you're doing? I said, Jim, drop whatever you're doing and come and listen to this guy sing. You're not going to believe this. And he went down and heard him. He went, call the band back in. We got to put this down on tape. That's how it all started. That's the first time I heard Otis. And that was a little song called These Arms Are Mine. He had 17 in a row.
Tell me about when you first got to hear Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, Steve.
Boy. He called me from the airport, flew in, and he said, I just want to check, make sure you were at the studio, because we weren't going to record till the next day. And he said, I'm coming right down from the airport. I'm coming down. He flew in on his own plane and called me as soon as he got to the phone. And to make sure I was there, he said, I've got a hit. I'm coming right down. So he walked in with his guitar, out of a case, of course, like I always did, and started playing me the first verse. And I went, whoa, man, that is really good. And he started that song in Sausalito when he was out there. And I think Al Jackson, our drummer, was out and told me about it, and I wound up mixing the album later. And when he played the Fillmore, and I don't know, yeah, it was a Fillmore. And so anyway, he started on the boathouse in Sausalito, and when we were out, this had to be a long time ago in '93. We were out with Neil Young, Booker T and the MGs, Neil Young, '93.
I saw that tour.
And so he came running in the dressing room right before the show, and he said he never did that, ever. I don't know how many shows it was, but he came backstage and he said, I'm reading this book about Stax, and then there you're talking about how Dock of the Bay was started. He said, I stayed in that boathouse, Bill Grammer's boathouse in Sausalito the week after Otis stayed there. And I said, that's where he started the song. And he was right about, leaving, I guess, Macon and headed to San Francisco. So,
wow. That's just incredible. Do you remember your last time seeing him?
Yeah, I do. Unfortunately, he popped his head in on a Friday, and we cut that song probably a week and a half, 2 weeks before on a session. And that was the best thing we had, we thought, the best song we had written in the 2 weeks. And we had Otis that time more than we had ever had him before. We only got him for maybe a half a day or something, just session time one day, and that was it. Because there's demand being on the road all the time. And he popped his head in and he says, well, I'll see you Monday. I said, okay, man. And I was setting up to do the guitar licks. So he never heard the guitar licks and never heard the waves and seagulls and all that stuff. Now, the horns, I think, with Wayne Jackson reminded me many years later that we did the horns live. They were there for another reason, and we cut the song live. But there was a lot of stuff that was overdubbed on it. So, but I did play that's the only record I can think of at Stax where I played both guitars. Played rhythm on the track and then played lead lines later. So,
take us back to In the Midnight Hour with Wilson Pickett, Steve. #1 hit, an enduring classic, and you have such a big connection to this.
Well, I remember that Jim Stewart and I picked up him and Jerry Wexler at the airport, and we checked them into the hotel. And Jerry says, "Well, Jim and I are going to go off and have a meeting. You guys just start writing." And okay, what are you going to do? We looked at each other like, what? Start writing. So I'd had this idea in the midnight hour based on some old gospel songs that he'd sang on. And I didn't know anything about Wilson Pickett. I really didn't. So I had to get an education. The thing was, Jerry came back from dinner with Jim and said, he just wanted to check. I said, I just want to check on you guys, see if you got anything. We played him in the midnight hour and don't fight it. He said, whoa. He said, you just keep writing. And so we wrote one more song, I'm Not Tired. We wrote 3 that night, cut all 3 the next day. All 3 went up the charts at different times. So
that is incredible, man. I mean, it's you know what's kind of cool is your legacy is like imprinted in some songs. You're like you were mentioned in the song Soul Man from Sam and Dave. Take us back to recording that and the famous time they say the "Play It, Steve" line.
Who knows why Sam said that? It was about the 3rd take, and he did it, and I'm glad he did. He probably is sad that he did it now. He probably hates himself for kicking himself for it. Anyway, the day before the session of Sam and Dave, Isaac comes back, and I was logging tapes or mixing. I don't know what I was doing. He said, "Cropper, I hate to bother you. I know you don't want to be bothered when you're doing something, but he said, I know that David Porter, and I have written a hit for tomorrow's session for Sam and Dave." He said, "But I can't come up with an intro." And I was sort of known at Stax as an intro guy. And he said, "Get your guitar, come down to the piano." And I said, I did. And I'm hooking up a guitar. And I said, "Well, play some changes." He said, "Well, just play me something." I said, "No, you play me some changes." And I started playing those, what we call hammer licks. Hammer tones is the real name for them, I think. And that intro, and that's that he just played some changes, and that's what I played on it. He said, "Man, that sounds great. Let's use that." I really don't remember when I came up with the idea of using the Zippo lighter on da 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 da. I do that in every verse, and but I use a Zippo lighter. And so I was asked one time, "What's the hardest session you ever played on?" And that reminded me of that when I said the hardest session I ever played on, when we did Sam and Dave, it made me get up and dance. I don't care what anybody said. But I had to keep that Zippo lighter on my left leg to keep it from falling off. If I started dancing or moving my leg, it would rock itself off. So I had to stay real still. So it's sort of like playing in handcuffs. I mean, it's really hard to do. And but I did it, and to hear it back now, it sounds so exciting, like we're up jumping around and all that, but we weren't. Sam and Dave were, but we weren't. And I'll regress a little bit. Why Sam said "Play It, Steve," I had no idea. It was about the 3rd take, and it just happened to be the best take, and that's the one we used.
What's kind of cool is years later, you're playing with the Blues Brothers, John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, and
I think go ahead.
And John does the same thing. He also says that too. Take us to first getting that gig and the what comes to your mind.
I think during that gig, that's a loaded question. How I got started, and I don't know, but I mean I do know how I got started. But he made people aware of Donald Duck Dunn and Steve Cropper. So somebody asked me recently, "What do you want on your tombstone?" And I said, "Pray It, Steve." Because the horns during the Blues Brothers, I still do, use a little hairspray to knock down the frizzies in my hair when I pull it back. And they would say, "Pray It, Steve." So I said, "Okay, pray it, Steve." If I'm underground on a tombstone, I don't know if it'll work, but I find the humor in it. They'd have to know the whole story. So how did I get into Blues Brothers band? I would have to say the story that I have is John Belushi heard Levon Helm and us played him New Year's Eve, and he happened to be there. And he made a comment to somebody, and they told me, and I wish I could remember who it was. He said, "If I ever put a band together, I want that band." Well, he got almost that band, and Tom Malone was in that band, and Lou Marini, and Alan Rubin, and so forth. So Tom, the trombone player, wound up being the director of the Saturday Night Live band. So when Steve Martin asked John and Danny to open these shows for him, he was doing 9 shows at the Universal Amphitheater during the summer. They were on hiatus anyway. And John says, "You know we don't do stand-up comedy." And Steve Martin says, "I don't care what you do." And John says, "Can we play music?" He said, "Sure, if you want to." That's when he decided to put the band together. And he started remembering that time. And so he goes to Tom Malone and he said, "Tom," he said, "I've got these songs. I've got these gigs we have to open for Steve Martin." And Steve was a writer. His connection to Saturday Night Live was he was a writer for Saturday Night Live for a long time. And then he had that hit record, King Tut. This is on radio, King Tut.
Right,
And it was funny. Yeah. And so Belushi asked Tom, he said, we've got open for these shows. Should we take the whole Saturday Night Live band? And Tom at the time said, you better get Dunn and Cropper because they're old road dogs. And we had done 2 world tours with Levon Helm and that band and the horns, the Saturday Night Live horns. And that's how we got in there. So whether it was John's idea or Tom's idea, I don't know, but that's the way it went down. And I remember him calling me. I was working on Robin Ford's album, mixing it, and I had about 3 songs left. And he called me, and nobody, the switchboard had their orders. If I'm mixing, you do not disturb me. So that's what we did. So I said, there's only one guy. There was a guy, a friend of mine, worked at the publishing company. We used to go to lunch a lot, and he'd call and say he was Stevie Wonder or he was the president or this, that, and the other. And so when they said John Belushi's on the phone for you, I just picked it up and said hi, and so I hung up. And I did that twice, and about the 3rd time, he said, Cropper, don't hang up. This really is John Belushi. He said, I need you up here right away. I said, I can't get up there. I'm in the middle of mixing an album. And I remember Robin Ford, after I hung up, he said, who are you talking to? I said, John Belushi. He wants me to come and rehearse with the band and open these shows for him. And Robin says, well, I'll do it. And I said, no, you won't. I called John back and I said, if you can wait 2 or 3 days, I'll be up there. And so I made a deal with my engineer at the time, Bruce Robb, and I said, can you finish mixing these last 2 tracks and let me hear them over the phone or whatever? He said, absolutely. So that's what we did. And so I went to New York and rehearsed with him, and we came back to LA and did the shows. That started it. And I don't think there would ever been a movie had that album not done so well. It did 3 million at the time, and it's gone over 4 now, but it did about 3 million. That's triple platinum, by the way. When it came out, Briefcase Full of Blues.
Yeah. No, totally.
The audience just wasn't expecting something like that. And we did, I remember some of the write-ups. We got a lot of flack, and we actually got some personal calls from some people, and they said, what are you guys, 2 guys like you doing, working with a couple of comedians? We said, they didn't know that John actually played. And I said, well, he actually plays drums. He played drums and sang and fronted a band for years before he ever became a comedian and actor. And I said, Dan Aykroyd actually is playing the harmonica on all these tracks on the show. And they said, really? Yeah, they didn't believe it. I said, you'd have to go to a show because he's really playing. He's good. And they've studied their craft well. I mean, they learned it well and studied good. And I mean, I think Belushi knew more about the blues than anybody did. And, Duck and I really weren't into blues. We were in rhythm and blues. There's a difference. We took old blues songs and made dance records out of them. And that's why we were successful with the people like Albert King and so forth, and Rufus and all. We made dance records out of them. And they were just doing a bunch of old blues songs, which is nothing wrong with blues songs. There's a market for it now, and was 10 years ago, big market. But at the time we did the Blues Brothers, and I think we're coming on 50 years or something like that in this year. So the movie came out, well, I guess last year, in 2000? It came out in, it'd been 50 years ago in 2020, yeah. So 2021. Belushi died in 83, so it'd be 23 would be 50 years since his death. And the movie was out for about 3 years. We did a whole tour, and we're starting another one. We're going to do another tour, and they never happened. So
it's incredible how you're connected to so many of these legacies, and one that's a really big part of your life is also the Beatles, which has so many different connections to you. Take us back into the beginning of that. I guess when Brian Epstein came to Memphis to explore having the Beatles record at Stax.
You read a lot, I can tell. He did. And the reason we didn't do the album, there's a couple of reasons, but the main reason was he didn't think security was strong enough in Memphis. And I kept trying to tell him, I said, Brian, there's plenty of security here. He didn't believe me because he's thinking like Memphis is going to be like every other city on the planet. And I said, no, Memphis is a little different. So I don't know. We didn't, I was fortunate enough, I have been through the years. I played on Ringo's first solo album, basically, and John Lennon's rock and roll album. And I played with George live on the Bob Dylan special. And but Paul and I, we've met several times, and every time we see each other, you know, we got to work together sometime. We never did do
it. Who was the first one you met? Ringo?
Well, to meet, I think it was at the Bag of Nails. 3 of them showed up, and I always tell a story. Guess which one wasn't there of the 4 guys? George was not there. So I met Paul, Ringo, and John at the same time.
This is in the 60s.
Yeah, 66.
And then you remember when Ringo approached you to do that record?
Yeah, that came about on after a Grammy Award thing that they were all at. And the plane left Nashville, went to Memphis and picked up some people, especially me. And I sat up front with them and had a blast. And Ringo said, they wanted to know what I was doing. I said, well, I'm, into my second album with Jose Feliciano. And Ringo says, well, man, I'm starting a new album. It's Sunset Sound. Why don't you come up and play on it? And I said, well, I can only come up on the weekends because I'm in the middle of producing. Okay, so I went up there that weekend and played on in the album with Klaus Borman. And it was Jim Keltner, Klaus Borman, Nicky Hopkins, and myself. I think just the 4 of us and Ringo. That'd be 5 of us. And Ringo, for some reason, doesn't like to play by himself. He likes to play aside another drummer. I don't know why, but
yeah, that's true. When you see him on that tour, he always has Greg Bissonette these days. So that's a really interesting point. How about with John? You mentioned John Lennon's rock and roll album. What's your favorite moment of either recording that or spending time with John?
I think spending time with him after the session. He asked me, he came over and said, can you stay after this next song? I said, sure. He said, I've got this riff I want to play it. And he said, I was thinking about Booker T and the MGs when I did it. And I said, well, I've left Stax, and I don't know, Booker's out here somewhere. He was in L.A. at the time, and we were A&M Studios, I think. And they went to New York and finished the album. He wanted to get back, so that's fine. But I took that riff back to my band, the guys I had as rhythm section at TMI, and put the song down. They loved it, and I loved it. And it's a little song called Beef Jerky.
Right.
And I heard it by accident. And they said, John Lennon's new record is out. I said, good. Here's a quarter or whatever. I go put it on a jukebox and play it. And Beef Jerky came on. Whoever loaded the jukebox put the record in upside down backwards. So the writing was correct, but the record was in backwards. So the flip side played first. And I said, man, that's Beef Jerky. I said, I helped write that with Lennon. Well, I'm not listed. And it was on his new record, Imagine, and they took it off immediately when I called them about it. So I don't even remember what they put on the flip side of Imagine.
Wow, that's an interesting story. You called them about that.
I did. I said, I'm part writers on that. I never get in. It doesn't matter. I said, well, that's another one I let slip through my fingers, I guess.
Wow, what an interesting story. And you mentioned Booker, who we've actually had here on the show in the studio with us and stuff. And one of the great gigs you guys did together, the Bob Dylan, you mentioned it too, the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert, Madison Square Garden. Take us back to that. What first comes to mind that really makes you smile and proud about that night?
Well, that night is different. That was a great night. What I didn't remember at the time, Duck says, do you know how many songs we just played on? I said, no, man, I was just reading charts and throwing the paper away and starting the next song. He said, we played on 27. My music was all over the place. It was on the floor somewhere. I don't know if Duck kept all of his, I guess. It was just changes. I mean, it wasn't any music written out or anything. It was just chord changes. He said we played on 27 songs that night. I don't know if we played on that many or not, but that's what he said. We had that many charts, I guess. Yeah, G.E. Smith played on it, and Jim Keltner was playing it. Who else? Was Anton Pig on that one?
Yep, on the drums, correct.
Okay, and I know Booker played on it, and Stevie Wonder was on the show, and it was a great night. What I remember most about the reason we were there, was Bob Dylan sticking his head in the curtain in the dressing room. Duck and I, we just finished the show, come off stage. He's putting his bass up. I'm putting my guitar up. We're standing in the same dressing room. And this guy pops his head in and says, they're going to do a special on me, and I want you guys to be in my band. And we turned around, it was Bob Dylan. We couldn't believe it. So that was finalized by Booker, and we had been playing golf with I think Booker was on the phone. It was Anton, Duck, and myself played golf at Braemar, and we were sitting at the bar when the phone rang, and it was Booker found me and called me, and I said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "I've been talking to Bob Dylan's people, and we've come to an agreement on about doing the show." And I said, "Okay." And we looked at Anton and said, "Anton, you going to be, oh man, I want to do it." Okay. So that's where it was finalized. That night was a different night. And when I saw it back, I think the thing that impressed me most was the ending. When all of the artists came back out for an encore and we all jammed, and Reggie played behind Johnny Cash during the show. And that was the way it was all arranged. But I think I was playing in the end, because we were still out there and all the artists came out. And they said, "You sure we're watching Johnny?" And I didn't know I was watching him that much, but I saw it back and I said, "Yeah, I was." He was just bigger than life. I knew his brother a lot more than I did Johnny. And I remember doing a thing in Memphis for him with Waylon doing it too. We did a roast for Johnny. And there's just some guy here in town, I can't even remember his name now, Nora hooked me up with, that knew Johnny Cash frontwards and backwards. And he wrote some funny stuff. And they said, "That was great, except you laughed at it." I said, "Well, some of it was the first time I'd ever heard it." I couldn't help but laugh when I was reading it. It was just funny stuff.
What's your favorite memory of being with Johnny Cash?
I guess probably that one, the roast. Maybe the Dylan thing, but the roast, I think, was the one I remember the most. And I remember when Waylon got up to do his thing, they had given everybody a plaque for that night. He carried his, it was just the timing of it. He had his in his hand, so he puts it down by the podium. He starts to do his thing, and the plaque fell off, and it went bam, real loud, because the podium and the microphone and all that. He said, "Honey, did you drop your wedding ring again?" And the audience lost it. That was it. That was one of the funniest things of the night. Man, Waylon was quick. He said, "Did you drop your wedding ring again?" Oh, awesome.
You know what's cool is you got to not only do that Bob Dylan gig at Madison Square Garden in '92, but several years later, decades later, you were back in a similar role at that venue with Eric Clapton in 2013 for the Crossroads Festival. Explain that to folks.
Well, I'm just very fortunate that Eric is a good friend, and I played his first one at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and then he called me back again, and when they did the second one. And what I remember most about that show was the 7 guitar players playing with Booker as an opener. And we really didn't open. We thought we were opening, but I think Clapton had gone out and opened doing a little acoustic set without a band. So we're the first live band out there. And what I remember about that gig was when Matt Guitar Murphy walked out, he got a standing ovation. About 35 people stood up and clapped like crazy. And he got another one at the end of it. So we thought that was pretty good. But, to have 7 guitars, we all took a 4-bar solo on Green Onions or whatever. I forget what we did, but that was pretty cool. And the ones that followed us was BB and Robert Cray, I think, followed us that night. Keb Mo was on it. We were in the dressing room back in the back with Keb, and oh man, it was just a great night. And I remember I said, "I'm gonna be here all night long," and Dak Aykroyd was emceeing that night, and he reached out, and I went over to his dressing room, talked to him for a little bit. He said, "We're gonna party when this thing is over." And so, I mean, it was after midnight when I went back to the hotel, and I went to sleep that night and got up the next morning. And somebody had texted me and said, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." It was about 3:00 in the morning. I went, and earlier the reason I went to sleep is earlier they had said so-and-so is just going on, and it's going to be another 2 hours before the concert is over. So I just rolled over and went to sleep. Ding dong, the witch is dead. I'll never forget that. That sounds like something Aykroyd would say. I don't know.
That's a funny one.
No party. Too late to party.
Do you remember the first time that you met Clapton, Steve?
Yeah, I do. I was at the Americana Hotel in New York, and Tom Dowd says, "There's a great guitar player from England coming over, and he's headed to L.A. to do a recording or whatever." And he said, "I can get him to stop over in a day because he's really wanting to meet you." And I said, "Fine, have him come on." And I was up there doing something in Atlantic, mixing some record or playing on a session or whatever. And it was because Tom Dowd was connected. So he had to stop off anyway to see Tom because Tom was going to produce him, I think, on this next album. They were going to, after the LA session, they were going to go down to Jamaica and do an album, I think. So, but that was the first time I met him. And I remember him walking, open the door, and I looked at him and, shook his hand and all that. And then I looked down to his boots he was wearing. And I went, oh, my God, man. He was a sharp-dressed man, let me tell you. Eric was one of the finest. He had good taste in music as well as clothing.
That's funny you say that because I was looking at your social media and there's a great picture of you with another really well-dressed man. Both of you look really good. It's you and Isaac Hayes at a Songwriters Award. You remember that?
Yeah, we used to pride ourselves a little bit at Stax when we had enough money to do it. And Jim Stewart had bought into a clothing store there that had a lot of great stuff. And this was after Elvis's deal. So anyway, we used to buy all the clothes there. And I remember Al Evans used to get his guys to bring over clothes and suits and all and lay them all out in the living room of my house. And I'd say, I want that one, or I'd try that one on. And I'd look at, he'd put out 4 or 5 suits and you'd pick 2 or 3 of them and say, we'll try those on. If they fit, then, he knew your sizes anyway. So most of them fit. They look pretty good. So he kept us pretty well dressed, I guess. Sharp dressed guys.
What's your favorite memory with Isaac Hayes?
Probably what we talked about earlier, the intro to Soul Man. He was such a great guy. And, I also remember a lot about Isaac. I remember he was a replacement for Booker T for piano for rhythm section to cut records. And I didn't know at the time. I mean, when I auditioned him, somebody mentioned his name and I went down to this club on Airways to hear him. And I knew he was good. Well, when they took a break, I went over and introduced myself. And I said, we're looking for a piano player and I think you fit the bill. Never even thought once about his singing. He turned out to be a great singer. So he made a lot of good records. I know that.
Yeah, he did. And it's neat how you've been able to play some of these songs with other people through the years and make some magical things happen. Like that time on the BBC when you played Sitting on the Dock with Tom Jones. You remember doing that?
Sir Jones. I remember that. What I remember most about that show, I remember doing the song, but what I remember most is we were through and I called him Sir John. He said, you're the first guy today that's called me sir. He's been knighted,
Right.
He should be addressed as sir all the time. He said, you're the first guy today that's called me sir.
And you worked with him in the past, or was that the only time?
No, we had worked with him, and he was a big fan of Otis years ago, and I knew that, but I didn't work with him then. He asked, we were doing the same show in Sydney, Australia, one of the morning TV shows. And he had asked the day before he was in, and he said, I understand the Blues Brothers are playing. Would they be interested in backing me on a couple of songs? And we said, okay. So he did, I think, Midnight Hour was one. He did Soul Man, I think. I remember Midnight Hour well. I don't remember the other song. But we did 2 with him. And then there was a show that we were in Australia. He was on another show or concert. And he said he was going to sit in with us, but he had to leave. That's what it was. He had to leave. He wanted to do it again, and that was the only time he could catch a plane, so he didn't get to do it that night. But and that was later. I forget that blues festival.
And Steve, one of the greatest musicians ever was part of your life through those Blues Brothers movies. James Brown, The Godfather. Talk about those, and where else did you guys cross paths?
Well, other than the movie, that's where it basically started, I guess. And we were doing his birthday party in what is it, Augusta, and we played the auditorium downtown, and I stayed over to play golf the next day. And other than I never did really play with him, I knew him, and he told me when we were doing one of the Super Bowl things, halftime Super Bowl, promoting the second movie. He said, I get this tap on my shoulder. He says, Cropper, you know when I started liking you? So my thought at the time was I didn't know he never did like me. But he said, when you gave me that award out in L.A. So I remember that and giving him an award and all that. So that we had crossed paths many times, and I was a big fan of his, obviously. We used to play a lot of his music, and and to find out he was going to be in the movie, that just blew everybody away. We didn't do much on the first one as far as getting together musically. On the second one, we saw each other a lot, even though he insisted on his band rather than the Blues Brothers play on his music. Well, that's fine. But, we saw each other a lot. And then we did right before he passed away, he was heading out the next day. We did Grauman's Chinese, where they interview different actors for different things. And they had James there and Napier, myself, and some of the other guys. I can't remember who all. And Danny was doing it, but he did it remotely from Canada, from Toronto, I think. And he was on the big screen on TV, but he was doing it remotely. He wasn't in LA at the time. And I do remember that. And I remember James leaving. He said, I got to leave tomorrow. We're going on tour in Europe. And he was going to maybe Japan or somewhere. I don't know where he was going, but anyway. And he died not too long after that. He died on a Christmas morning. And I stayed in touch with his guitar player for a while. And he said, I got a call. He said, James went in for a cold, and he was afraid of losing his voice because we're getting ready to go on tour. And his people called and said, don't throw away your ticket. Even though James is going to, get some help at the hospital, we may be leaving the next day or whenever. So don't throw away your ticket yet. And that's what he told me. And then I don't know if that's ever been resolved or not on how he actually died. He went in for some kind of flu thing. Maybe he had COVID-19. I don't know.
I remember it well on the Christmas, as you remember that. I remember paying tribute on the radio, playing a whole bunch of his music on Christmas. And as we go to wrap it up, final question for you, Steve. Yeah. With all these great memories, there's got to be like a specific song that you're maybe most proud of or that makes you feel the best. Maybe I'm going to pick a song to go out on. What would be a nice song besides something tasty from the record? What's another one from your legacy you're most proud of? If you were to ask,
I think they're putting out the title song, Fired Up. The other one that was out has been Far Away. And I think Fired Up is the next one. That's the title of the album. So Fired Up. And I love the lyric on that. It's a good one. So play that one if you can.
We're gonna. You're a good man. I appreciate it, Steve. I'm giving you a big hug and a high five. I had so much fun talking to you. I hope you had a good time talking today,
my brother. Where are you actually at on the islands? Which island are you on?
We are in Honolulu in Oahu.
Oh, okay.
You got memories that connect to Hawaii? What's your favorite Hawaii memory?
Many memories.
What's your favorite Hawaii memory?
My favorite, I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but I remember my first time I went surfing was there, and I was cutting my bottoms of my feet up with the coral that was on there, but I didn't know that until I hit the sand a couple hours later. So I had cuts in the bottoms of my feet and blisters the size of $50 on my back.
Oh, man.
That was not a fun memory. But
no, that isn't.
That's what I remember the most.
And how about playing here, though? Something more on the fun side. Any good playing?
And, we've played there many times, but, most of my time, I hate to say, has been in Maui.
Nothing wrong with that.
I played golf in both places. We used to play a lot of tournaments and all. So most of them were in Maui.
Okay. And any concerts that stick out?
Papahala and what is it, Kanapali?
Yep.
I used to stay in that area. I used to stay in the suites of the Western Suites or whatever they're called, Kanapali.
Yep, on the Gold Coast. That's a nice area on the west side of Maui.
The other tournament where the pros play is Kapalua.
Yeah. That's also in the same area, west side of Maui. I know exactly where you're talking about. Very, very nice over there. Any concerts that stick out from here?
The one that was my favorite is when the Blues Brothers played for the PGA on a Wednesday night.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun. And today, I'll date myself now, because that was right after, and I saw Peter Jacobson that night, and that was right after Fluff was going to leave him and go somewhere else. And so Peter sang a song to Fluff. He said, "Can you come up and play with me?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know the song." He said, "Well, it's just a spinoff on," and he told me the song that he got it from. And I said, "Well, I know that one, okay." And we got up and did it. And I remember there was a bunch of guys. Gary McCord was there that night, and bunch of the older pros.
That's really cool. I appreciate all your memories you're sharing, Steve. I'm giving you a big hug and a high five. I hope you had a lot of fun today. This
And
means a lot.
I do stay in touch with, and I will email him tomorrow probably, or later tonight maybe. It's Joe Carrero. You know him? He's on Maui.
Wow.
If you know him. And he filled in for John Tropez one time. And John is the guy who took Matt Guitar Murphy's place in the Blues Brothers band. So there was a show he couldn't make, and Joe Carrera came up, but we've been friends ever since. Great guy. He's always sending me a little Hawaiian humor from time to time. So it is what it is.
Well, hopefully he'll be listening.
We're connected and glad to do it. And thank you very much.
You're welcome, Steve. God bless. Stay safe, brother.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Aloha, my friends. It's Steve Cropper. I have returned to support the radio station. And my buddy Dave Lawrence, man, what a great time we've had, huh? So please make a donation now if you can to the radio station. Thank you very much.